Well, you mentioned tank nerfs, and this is basically my next question. But before that, for people who pug, and okay, I see you're pugging too, but you're the tank. For the rest of us, when you pug and when you push your keys a little bit higher, it gets harder to find keys because there's simply less keys for people who are like pugging 13s, 14s, and so forth. So once you go up that ladder, it becomes a little bit harder to get into keys. But now there's an extra layer on top of that because it seems, for whatever reason, that the tanks are much less this season. So it's usually the case you try to get into a key for, let's say, 15, 20 minutes. You finally get an invite. You might be a healer, you might be a DPS. And then you end up waiting for like 20 more minutes for a tank to show up simply because they're not there. You probably don't experience that, but it's a huge problem for the rest of the community. And as I said, our next topic is the tank busters. Do you think that this is one of the main reasons that people kind of went away from playing a tank role and just opted to either quit the game or go DPS or heal?
Um, there, I don't even know where to start with this. So I think the first big issue was that they did nerf tanks. The most compelling thing about being a tank was being immortal, especially if you were good at your class. What they've
Mhm.
done is they've raised the skill floor, making it harder to tank, and they've lowered the skill ceiling, making it more punishing for players who can play at the highest level. So it's kind of it's just made tanking a little bit more annoying. I actually kind of have to think in keys now. Before I used to be able to just kind of go in and go with the flow and it'd be fine. I have clips I'm sure I can pull up from Dragonflight where I'm just soloing pulls for
Yeah.
2-3 minutes after my group dies and they're all running back. I mean, I've been able to do that this tier as well, but it's just a lot more difficult to do. So you have that component where they made tanks a little less powerful in like a defensive regard as well as offensively. They're doing generally they're doing less damage than they have in the past compared to what DPSs are able to perform. On top of that, they also nerfed the power of like damage trinkets. So that's kind of the fun thing about tanks in the past is like you could really push your damage even further by getting DPS trinkets, and that's no longer the case. On top of that, they don't have any good defensive trinkets in the game, so you're really just running stat sticks. So you're playing the class, which is would make sense from like a game design standpoint because they introduced these new hero talents, which are kind of powerful. But they add a lot more button bloat to some specs, which has also made tanks more difficult to play because there's now all these different layers of nuance to every single spec. And I guess like sub spec these hero talents. So I think tanking has just become extremely more complicated, but without the reward of how powerful you were able to be in previous tiers. And I think that's ultimately why tanks are quitting now. Of course it's subjective. One tank might quit because he started playing in Headshot and he loves it. Another tank might quit because he just doesn't play WoW anymore. But I've actually noticed as a tank, I notice sometimes healers are extremely hard to find. Have you guys heard those kind of like claims before?
Oh,
Well, we're healers,
kind
so
of, yeah,
Well,
but
I guess not. Yeah, so
yeah.
it's weird to ask a tank like why the tanks aren't
yeah,
queuing because I'm not sure. I'm queuing up.
yeah.
I recently did and this is I'm gonna actually have a video releasing in a couple of days. I did a 0 to hero challenge as Preservation Evoker. Extremely fun healer to play. But I like throughout the whole challenge, and maybe I only went up to 10s, but maybe beyond that it's harder to find tanks. But all the way up to 10s, tanks were insanely easy to find. It was just how good they were. And again, that's where it comes back to like that skill ceiling and skill floor were moved around, making tanks kind of good tanks harder to find,
Yeah,
I guess.
we had a healer guest here a few episodes back, and he said, guys, because we had the same sentiment. There's no tanks once you go 10s and beyond. And it was like, I know where the tanks are. They're just in 5s and 6s, and they stay there because they got one-shotted, and just people kick them out of the group, so they go and continue to do 5s and 6s, but they don't progress beyond that. And that goes back probably to the fact that the tanking now is much harder compared to what it was before. And
It's much harder for
yeah.
sure.
And one thing that I'll say, and that's kind of like I was actually advocating for in Dragonflight for tanks to be able to be healed a little bit because in Dragonflight I didn't heal the tanks. They were just so powerful that in my mind they could have like a key with 5 tanks. They wouldn't need anything else, but they just couldn't beat the DPS check and the timer. That was the only problem. It's not like surviving or healing or something like that. So I was saying maybe if they want to make killing more fun, let the healers heal the tanks, and this is exactly what happened. But I guess now this is what we get, but it's not exactly what we were imagining is going to happen, because as a side effect now tanks are just unwilling to play. So from that perspective, I guess making it harder is a minus. That's something that you were alluding to as well, right?
Essentially, and it's similar to how probably AUG evokers feel. Like, I mean, AUG is obviously extremely popular, but it's so niche because tanking right now is you're a tank, like you're in control of your own your own survivability as well as the routing. But if you don't enjoy that aspect, then you probably won't enjoy the role. Just like AUG, like if you like to do big damage, you're not gonna probably enjoy AUG because you're mostly buffing others and focusing more on crowd control as a support spec. So tanking is just kind of fallen back into what it is, which is get hit in the face and pray your healer in your group know how to keep you alive. And that isn't enjoyable for, I think, a lot of people who were tanking in Dragonflight, where you can go on a Vengeance Demon Hunter, you were competitive with damage, you were completely locking down everything, and like you didn't really care. And you felt immortal, and now that's not the case anymore.